Hello, everyone. My name is Graciel Ann L. Durantino, and I will be reporting on sources of funds of private and public educational institutions. The great public benefits of education have historically prompted governments to assume the primary role in managing and funding schools. Recently, a growing interest in improving school quality and student outcomes, and a quest for greater school choice for parents and students, and for more creativity and innovation in the schools themselves, have challenged the notion of government's primacy in education. This trend, emerging in a number of countries, is based on the belief that the public interest in education can be better served by also involving private entities, including parents, non governmental organizations, and enterprises, in addition to government agencies in funding and managing schools. Education in the Philippines is provided by public and private schools, colleges, universities, and technical and vocational institutions in the country. Funding for public education comes from national government. For the academic year 2017 to 2018, about 83% of K 12 students attended public schools and about 17% either attended private schools or were homeschooled. The Department of Education, or DepEd, reported that 21,724,454 learners have enrolled in public and private schools nationwide for the academic year 2020 to 2021. Data from the department shows that as of July 21, about 20,475,530 learners have enrolled in public schools and 1,219,094 in private schools. Region 4A Calabarzon logged the highest number of enrollees at 2,951,330, and the Cordillera Administrative Region the lowest at 333,840. The enrollees were from kindergarten to senior high school, as well as learners with disabilities and those taking the alternative learning system. In school year 2019 to 2020, there were 14,435 private schools which operated nationwide. Meanwhile, there are 398,794 students from private schools who transferred to public schools as of September 1. According to Education Secretary Leonor Briones, the total number of enrollees in public and private schools is 77% of the total number of students for the school year 2019 to 2020. This is because private schools have been affected by the downturn of the economy. The parents who lost their jobs can no longer fund the studies of their children. This report focuses on the sources of funds of private and public educational institutions. Unlike public schools, of which are funded by the national government, private schools are funded from their capital investment or equity contributions, of course, in tuition fees and other school charges, grants, loans, subsidies, passive investment income, and income from other sources. The education system in the Philippines has largely been shaped by its colonial history, particularly by the Spanish and American cultures. Today, schooling in the Philippines is largely modeled in the U.S. education system. So let us go to the legal basis for school funding. Republic Act No. 10533, or the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, an act enhancing the Philippine basic education system by strengthening its curriculum and increasing the number of years for basic education, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. In the same Republic Act No. 10533, Section 2, Declaration of Policy, states that the state shall establish, maintain, and support a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education relevant to the needs of the people, the country, and the society at large. In Section 11 of Republic Act No. 10533, Appropriations, the Secretary of Education shall include in the department's program the operationalization of the Enhanced Basic Education Program, the initial funding of which shall be charged against the current appropriations of the DepEd. Thereafter, the amount necessary for the continued implementation of the Enhanced Basic Education program shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. The sources of funds for education come from national government, local government, parents and students, school owners, business and industry, learning institutions, philanthropists, and civic cultural organizations, and the alumni support. In this report, my resources for the funding for public and private schools is from Batas Pambansa Bilang 232. The Batas Pambansa Bilang 232, or the Education Act of 1982, is an act providing for the establishment and maintenance of an integrated system of education. Section 2 coverage. This act shall apply to and govern both formal and non-formal systems in public and private schools in all levels of the entire educational system. In Section 33 Declaration of Policy, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the state that the national government shall contribute to the financial support of educational programs pursuant to goals of education as declared in the Constitution. Towards this end, the government shall adopt measures to broaden access to education through financial assistance and other forms of incentives to schools, teachers, pupils, and students, and encourage and stimulate private support to education through inter alia, fiscal, and other assistance measures. So in Batas Pambansa Bilang 232, the funding of public schools can come from national funds. So in Section 34 states that public schools shall continue to be funded from national funds, provided that local governments shall be encouraged to assume operation of local public schools on the basis of national fund participation and adequate revenue sources which may be assigned by the national government for the purpose. With the coronavirus disease 2019, or the COVID-19 pandemic, threatening to erode the gains and progress, the 4.506 trillion proposed national budget for fiscal year 2021, which is higher by 9.9% than the 2020 budget, 4.1 trillion pesos, equivalent to 21.8% GDP, will support the government efforts to address the health crisis, kickstart the economic recovery, and help Filipinos more resilient as they move forward in the post-pandemic life. The 2021 budget spending priorities. The budget will support a program of recovery and rehabilitation focused on improving the healthcare system, ensuring food security, reviving infrastructure development, facilitating the shift to the post-COVID-19 life through a digital government and economy, and providing social protection and safety nets for the most vulnerable and affected sectors. So in this slide, it shows the increase of 9.9% budget from the 2020 national budget of 4.1 trillion pesos to 2021 proposed national budget of 4.506 trillion pesos. In the 2021 proposed national budget, it has its budget dimension by sector. These are the social services, economic services, general public services, debt burden, and defense. The share of social services will grow by 11.3% from 1.495 trillion pesos in 2020 to 1.664 trillion pesos into 2021, mainly to strengthen the health sector's capacity to respond to the challenges caused by the pandemic. Likewise, economic services will register a 12.3% increase from 1.2 trillion pesos in 2020 to 1.347 trillion pesos in 2021 to revitalize the Build infrastructure program. A more proactive approach is needed to respond to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. The government must invest in urgent programs and projects that will help the country bounce back from this crisis and accelerate growth in the coming years. So in 2021, the two, 2,950 billion or 65.5% of the 4.506 trillion proposed national 2021 national budget will go to national government agencies, with the education sector receiving the biggest allocation of 754 billion pesos. Other major sectors that will receive the largest increases over the 2020 budgets are labor and employment at 53.7%, transportation 42.6%, and health sectors at 15.5%. So these are the top 10 departments that in the proposed national budget 2021. First, education, followed by public works, interior and local government, defense, health, social welfare, transportation, agriculture, the judiciary, and the labor and employment. The 2021 budget spending priorities is to save lives and protect communities. The Duterte administration is committed to take swift and comprehensive action in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. For 2021, the entire budget will focus on containing the outbreak, cushioning its impact on vulnerable groups, and adapting to the post-pandemic life to ensure economic recovery. So with this, I'll just give emphasis on the education, in which it has in state universities and colleges, it has an allocation of 83.3 billion pesos, universal access to quality tertiary education of 47.1 billion pesos, education assistance and subsidies 28 billion pesos, basic education learning continuity plan of 16.1 billion pesos, and DepEd computerization program of 9 billion pesos. The budget for education. The Philippine Constitution has mandated the government to allocate the highest portion or proportion of budget to education. However, in reality, the Philippines remains to have one of the lowest budget allocations to education among ASEAN countries. Next funding source of public schools is the financial aid assistance to public secondary schools, wherein in Section 35 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that the national government shall extend financial aid and assistance to public secondary schools established and maintained by local governments, including barangay high schools. Also, the funding source of public schools come from share of local government, wherein in Section 36 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that provinces, cities, and municipalities and barangays shall appropriate funds in their annual budgets for the operation and maintenance of public secondary schools on the basis of national fund participation. Another fund source of public schools are the special education funds. In Section 37 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that the proceeds of the Special Education Fund accruing to local governments shall be used exclusively for the purposes enumerated in Section 1 of Republic Act No. 5447 and in accordance with rules and regulations issued by the Ministry of Education, Culture and Sports, and the Ministry of the Budget. Said proceeds shall be considered a local fund and shall be subject to Presidential Decrees number 477, Presidential Decree number 1375, and other applicable local budget laws and regulations. In Republic Act 7160, an act of providing the Local Government Code of 1991, Section 309, states that there shall be maintained special funds, there shall be maintained in every provincial, city, or municipal treasury the following special funds. Special Education Fund, or SEF, which shall consist of the respective shares of provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays in the proceeds of the additional tax on real property to be appropriated for purposes prescribed in Section 272 of this Code, and in Section 272, application of proceeds of the additional 1% of Special Education Fund tax states that the proceeds from the additional 1% tax on real property accruing to the Special Education Fund, or SEF, shall be automatically released to the local school boards, provided that in case of provinces, the proceeds shall be divided equally between the provincial and municipal school boards, provided, however, that the proceeds shall be allocated for the operation and maintenance of public schools, construction and repair of school buildings, facilities and equipment, educational research, purchase of books and periodicals, and sports development as determined and approved by the local school board. Also in Batas Pambansa Bilang 232, in Section 38, one of the funding sources of public schools from tuition and other school fees. It states that secondary and post-secondary schools may charge tuition and other school fees in order to improve facilities or to accommodate more students. The financial support for the maintenance and operation of public ordinary schools is provided for by the provincial and city governments. The source of provincial income are the following: internal revenue allotments from the national government, share from local taxes, fees from the services rendered, and income from miscellaneous receipts. The major portion of the support of the secondary schools comes from tuition and matriculation fees imposed by the provincial board on all high school students. In the case of municipal high schools, they are also supported from students' tuition and matriculation fees and general fund transfer from the municipality where they are located. The public schools are subsidized by the national government as provided on Republic Act 9155, Governance of Education Act of 2001, and Republic Act 6655, which is the Free Public Secondary Act of 1988. However, the government support is inadequate, so the parents are willing to provide additional support through GPTA and homeroom PTA on a voluntary basis. Voluntary contributions and donations by private individuals constitute additional sources of income. Another funding source of public schools are income from other sources, in which in Section 39 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that government-supported educational institution may receive grants, legacies, donations, and gifts for purposes allowed by existing laws. So in Section 7 of Republic Act 9155, letter E of 11, states that accepting donations, gifts, bequests, and grants for the purpose of upgrading teachers or learning facilitators' competencies, improving and expanding school facilities, and providing instructional materials and equipment, such donations or grants must be reported to the appropriate district supervisors and division superintendents. Now let's go to the funding source of private schools. In Batas Pambansa Bilang 232, in Section 40, funding of private schools states that private schools may be funded from their capital investment or equity contributions, tuition fees and other school charges, grants, loans, subsidies, passive investment income, and income from other sources. Loans, grants, and donations from stakeholders are a big help to every school in order to succeed in every programs and projects for the best of its people and students. In Section 41, another funding source of private schools states is the government assistance, wherein in Section 41 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that the government, in recognition of their complementary role in the educational system, may provide aid to the programs of private schools in the form of grants or scholarships or loans from government financial institutions, provided that such programs meet certain defined educational requirements and standards and contribute to the attainment of national development goals. So, examples of these are the Social Security System, World Bank, Australian Aid, Asian Development Bank, and the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Next funding source of private schools come from tuition and other fees. In Section 42 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that each private school shall determine its rate of tuition and other school fees or charges. The rates and charges adopted by schools pursuant to this provision shall be collectible and their application or use authorized subject to rules and regulations promulgated by the Ministry of Education, Culture, and Sports. Next funding source is the income from other sources. In Section 43 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that any private school duly recognized by the government may receive any grant and legacy, donation, gift, bequest, or device from any individual, institution, corporation, foundation, trust, or philanthropic organization or research institution or organization as may be authorized by law. Business and industry support education because they want to have highly qualified manpower for the greater benefit of the business enterprise they are managing. So according to the 2010 annual survey of Philippine Business and Industry, or the ASPBI, a total of 9,949 establishments are engaged in private education. Furthermore, private schools are authorized to engage in any auxiliary enterprise to generate income primarily to finance their educational operations and or to reduce the need to increase students' fees. Another source of funds of private schools are institutional funds, wherein Section 44 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that the proceeds from tuition fees and other school charges, as well as other income of schools, shall be treated as institutional funds. Schools may pool their institutional funds in whole or in part under joint management for the purpose of generating additional financial resources. An institutional fund is a mutual fund that's available to large investors, such as pension funds and not-for-profit organizations, with substantial amounts to invest. Typical institutional funds have higher minimum investments but lower fees than the retail funds that are available to the general public. And lastly, the funding source of private schools come from relating to gifts or donations to schools, in which in Section 47 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 232 states that all gifts or donation in favor of any school, college, or university recognized by the government shall not be subject to tax, provided that such gifts or donations shall be for improvement of classrooms and laboratory of library facilities and shall not inure to the benefit of any officer, director, official, or owner or owners of the school, or paid out as salary, adjustments, or allowance of any form or nature whatsoever, except in support of faculty and/or professional chairs. That's all for my report, and thank you for listening.